Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to dig into something you think you know, but it's got some surprising twists. The legal concept of false imprisonment. It's about way more than just locked doors and prison cells, and getting a handle on it means understanding a fundamental right we all share.
All right, let's just jump right in with two stories, two real cases that went to court, and they seem worlds apart. In one corner, you have a nursing home patient, Mr. Newman, who was physically trapped for 51 days. And in the other, you have a new employee, Miss Hardy, who was questioned in an unlocked office for about half an hour and never even tried to leave.
So you have two people. Both were kept in a room, right? But one situation was illegal and the other was perfectly fine in the eyes of the law. How does that work? The difference is all in the specific legal rules of a tort called false imprisonment, and we are going to break it all down.
Well, to figure this puzzle out, we've got to start with the basics. We need the legal rule book, the actual definition of what we're even talking about. What does the law actually say imprisonment is?
So here it is, straight from the books. False imprisonment is the direct restraint of one person's physical liberty without adequate legal justification. Now, those are lawyer words, but the key bits to hang on to are direct restraint and without justification. This isn't about, getting stuck in an elevator by accident. The act has to be intentional.
Okay, so for someone to actually win a false imprisonment case, they basically have to prove three things happened. First, the act has to be intentional. Second, a confinement actually has to happen. And third, this is the big one, it has to be against their will. So let's start with that middle one. What does it even mean to be confined?
So what is confinement really? You're probably picturing locked doors and barred windows, right? But the law is way broader than that. Turns out, you can be trapped by words just as easily as you can be by walls.
Let's look back at Mr. Newman's awful situation at that nursing home. This was confinement in the most brutal physical sense. They didn't just lock him in. When he managed to escape, they literally dragged him back, and they even tied him to a restraint chair. Yeah, that is about as clear-cut as it gets.
But here's the really important part. You don't need physical force. You don't need walls. Sometimes just the threat or the improper use of authority is enough to trap someone.
Okay, check out this case. Enright versus Groves. You've got Mrs. Enright just sitting in her parked car. A police officer comes up to her about her dog being off its leash. A minor thing. But then he demands to see her driver's license, which he had no right to do in that situation. He didn't lock her in the car, but he gave her an ultimatum. Show me your license or you're going to jail. That's not really a choice, is it?
So what happens? Mrs. Enright refuses this illegal command, and boom, the officer arrests her. Because his demand was unlawful, the arrest itself became an unlawful confinement. This is a perfect example of what the law calls false arrest. It's basically a specific type of false imprisonment, but it's done by someone pretending to have legal authority when they really don't.
All right, this next part is maybe the most interesting piece of the puzzle, because it's what really separates those two stories we started with. The rule is the confinement has to be against the person's will. It all comes down to what's going on in their head.
So let's circle back to Ms. Hardy, the employee who is questioned in the office. Remember, the door was unlocked, no one physically threatened her, and when the court looked at this, they zoomed right in on her state of mind.
And here's the absolute kicker. She even said that, she felt pressure to be there, but she also admitted that she wanted to stay to clear her name. She never asked to leave. And because she made a conscious, voluntary choice to stick around, the court said, nope, that's not imprisonment.
And this just lays the difference out perfectly, doesn't it? On one side, you have Miss Hardy, who chose to stay. On the other, you have Mr. Newman, where every single thing he did, begging to be let go, trying to escape over and over, was a clear signal that he was being held completely against his will. Legally, those are two totally different universes.
The law is super clear on this. Just feeling like you should stay because you're scared you might lose your job or because you want to avoid making a scene, that's not enough. That's what the law calls moral pressure, and it doesn't count. The restraint has to come from actual force or from words that you are legitimately afraid to ignore.
So you might be wondering, why is the law so picky about this? Why this line between feeling pressured and being actually forced? Well, it all goes back to a really fundamental idea about our society.
The whole reason this law even exists is to protect something we all take for granted, our basic freedom to move around. It's about drawing a very clear line in the sand to protect that right, while at the same time saying, look, not every uncomfortable situation where you feel stuck is actually illegal.
All right, so let's boil this all down. What are the main things to remember? First, being confined can happen with words or threats of authority, not just with locks and chains. Second, the person's will is everything. If they choose to stay, it's not false imprisonment. Third, it doesn't matter if you were just joking. Your motive is irrelevant. And finally, you don't have to be held for hours. Even a super brief confinement can be illegal.
Okay, that brings us to one last thing for you to chew on. Based on everything we've just talked about, intent, confinement, the person's will, what do you think? If someone pulls a prank arrest on their friend, fake handcuffs and all, could that actually be false imprisonment, even if it was all a big joke? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.